Welcome to this Sunday virtual class sponsored by BYU Library Family History in Provo, Utah. Our class today will be Genealogy Programs, Desktop versus Online, Advantages and Disadvantages, presented by James Tanner, a longtime genealogist and teacher of family history. We greatly appreciate his preparations and willingness to share his knowledge on this topic. So I'll now turn the time over to you, James.
Okay, today we're going to be talking about genealogy programs, desktop versus online, advantages and disadvantages. And as usual, I guess with me and the way that I usually handle things is to give a lot of history in the background. So you have context, so you have a little bit of a better idea of why things happen, not just how things happen. So we'll get right into it. The first, I guess this is the important thing, and it's probably not one that you would remember or know about, and that is this is the first so-called desktop computer. It looks a lot like an adding machine, which it actually was a calculator adding machine, but it had a memory and it was programmable. And so from that standpoint, was considered to be the first computer. It's called an Olivetti Programma 101, and it was released in 1965. And it says it's the size of a typewriter. And my question, of course, is how many people out there actually have or have used a typewriter? And so you may not really relate to that anymore. You can't say was the size of a typewriter. You have to say size of something else. And then in the mid 1970s, a whole bunch of different home computers, they call them, desktop home computers, personal computers, PCs. That's what PC stands for, is personal computer. And there was the TRS-80, came from Radio Shack. There was an Apple II, which came from Apple, obviously, and the Commodore. And there was that was a PET, and there was also PET, called a personal electronic computer, and it was transactor is the word they used for Commodore, and these were the popular ones that people were purchasing. And it's interesting to note the time frame here, because the 1970s, to most people, of course, that would seem today would seem quite a long time ago, but to some of us, that's not really that old. And here's a picture of the first three. You can see the Commodore PET over there on the left, and then the Apple II, and the TRS, or Radio Shack computer, on the right. So these are the three computers that really started the whole revolution, and started pushing all of this information with these computers that are for function to look like a keyboard with a couple of things sitting on it, usually a monitor of some kind. And they were self-contained, and you simply plugged them in and you were ready to start loading programs and operating the computer, which made it a more of a product than it had ever been before. And yes, it's been 46 years since those desktop computers showed up. And if you're much older than 46 years, you'll be able to remember that. I'm sure that those who are under 50 years of age today probably don't remember a world that didn't have personal computers someplace. But now we have, they're literally in every place you can imagine. And it's interesting sometimes to compare for example, the iPhone, which I have sitting here next to my Apple laptop that I'm using here. And I have more computing power in my iPhone that I have sitting here than was available to me at the University of Utah mainframe computer in the engineering building. And that was about 46 years ago. So there's been a tremendous change, and that tremendous change is something that our world has now grown up with. They don't remember anything primarily unless you're well into your 60s. You probably don't remember anything about the world as it was before there were computers available everywhere. So what about genealogy and genealogy software programs? So the first genealogy software program was developed in 1979. So you can see it's pretty close to the beginning time of computers. And it was called Genealogy: Compiling Roots and Branches. And it was programmed by a person named John J. Armstrong. And it was advertised in the September issue of the Personal Computing magazine back in 1979. And it sold for $250. And I did a little bit of calculation, got an inflation calculator out, and that $250 back in 1979 would be equivalent to $1,039.38 in 2023. And I guess my observation was, you should be happy that computer programs really haven't increased in price, because that very, very simple basic program would now be almost exorbitantly expensive. In fact, you can subscribe to, for sort of a check on this, for less than $1,000, you can subscribe to almost all of the Adobe programs. So Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Lightroom, all of the different kinds of Adobe programs. You can subscribe to like 20 or 30 different programs for far less than $1,000 a year. And that $1,000 was a lot of money, and for a computer program. I don't know how many he sold. I would be surprised if he sold very many. So on that one, of course, it was the source code that you had. And what that meant was that you didn't have a program that you loaded into your computer. You typed it into the computer. You had to copy the entire code into the computer and then run the program in order for it to actually work. During this period of time, this was just about the time that I became interested in genealogy. And so a couple of years later, there were other programs available, and those are the ones that I started using to record my genealogy back in that time period. Okay, so these are the other ones. These are some of the earliest ones that appeared that caught on and were used by people software. And you'll notice that two of those are still in use. They're still being produced. They're still available for the latest computers you have. They both work on both Apple and Windows or PC computers. PAF is gone, but RootsMagic and Ancestral Quest are still two of the most popular desktop computer programs. There are now, probably more than a dozen, maybe 20 or 30 actively updated desktop programs that are available, and some of which are extremely sophisticated. Without mentioning a whole long list of names, you can go look for desktop computer programs, genealogy programs, and find a long list. And I'll show you where you can get the complete list in just a second. But Personal Ancestral File disappeared back in quite a few years ago, and we'll get to that and discuss that a little bit. Here's where you can get an almost complete list, probably as complete as it's possible to do, of every computer program that has been or will be or is available. You'll see that it's called GensoftReviews.com. And I think if you have any interest at all in obtaining software for genealogical purposes, you should be very familiar with this list of reviews. Periodically there's every year there's a Gensoft Review top 10 or whatever. And right now there are something over 1,000, about 1,068 programs that are being reviewed here. When they say reviewed, it means people can give them stars, up to 5 stars. And so the higher the number of stars is, the more popular those programs are. And you'll see that many programs have very, very active people using those programs. Some of the programs on there are from Europe, and some of them are from English-speaking countries. And so there's a lot of variety there. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of that and why we would think about it, and the reason that the whole presentation is being put on. Another kind of time frame reference that we probably need to be aware of is the issue of the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web was developed in 1991 and reduced. That was when it was first admitted. At the time I was teaching classes at Scottsdale Community College in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I heard through the grapevine at the college that they had something really new that had just come up on the internet. Now, the internet had existed for some time, and it was all very text-based. In other words, you typed in commands to move around on the internet, to read things, and to connect with people. But this was supposed to be all visual, all images. And so we went into a classroom that had been set up with a computer that they had hooked up to this part of the internet, of what they called the internet. And it was the World Wide Web. And there were 6 websites. It's now into the billions of websites, but there were 6 websites online. But it was instantly almost everybody who had any. It's like the minute you saw it, you knew that was exactly what was going to happen, that was the way that the world was going to develop. And we very quickly became very much involved in that process as I was working around. And that's only been 32 years. So if you were, say, 40 years and older, you can probably remember there not being an internet available around the world to everyone. So this is kind of the concept, and the reason I bring that up is pretty simple. There's a tendency among all people involved in technology that older people, meaning people of my age and maybe a little older, basically don't have any background in technology, and that they don't want to use it and they aren't involved with it. But what I'm pointing out here is that people like me have been involved in it for 46 years, for almost 50 years. So we've been involved in it much longer than most. And of course, young people have no lock on technology. And it is true that there are still people out there, the older people, who are resistant to technology. But I've found that resistance to technology and lack of understanding of how computers work and all of that is pretty much general up and down through the ages of different age brackets. I find many young people who are I would call computer illiterate. And I find equally people in the Middle Ages and around that are also. I don't think it has anything to do with the age anymore. You could say that about people because there was always this kind of advertising way of putting things out that they're new, and everybody young and anybody who was savvy was going to be involved. Well, that may have been true 40 years ago, but it's not necessarily true today. Everybody that I know, and all those who are my age, are basically involved in texting, using their phones, taking photos. I'm getting photos from my neighbors who are very close into their 90s, and they're out taking pictures and showing us, for example, what's happening around our neighborhood with the snow being melted. It's a snow melt from the mountains and all the water running down out of the mountains. So, I mean, this is not, this perception of being old is not necessarily being held up anymore. But what I'm pointing out here in this slide is that you have a choice. You can run and do genealogy on your own desktop, and you can do it. This is somebody using two different computers at once, which is something that I've been doing for a long time. And then the other possibility is to have everything on your own computer, and the other way to do it is to have nothing on your computer in a sense, and have it all either backed up online or available only online. So we have this split, and this is still a decision that has to be made. Are you going to maintain your all of your genealogical information locally, meaning on your own machines and your own hard drives and your own backup and storage devices, or are you going to be connected and put that out there on the internet? And I'll talk about both sides. And one of the things that I have to emphasize is that it isn't an either or, it's a both. You can do both. And there are some limitations, and I'll discuss that also. So you can use a desktop program and have complete control over your content, assuming that you know all about how to protect your data on your computer and back it up so that you don't lose it when you have a power outage, or if you have one of the devices go bad. If your computer goes bad, will you lose all of your data? That's basically the question we ask over and over again. That's a subject of a different presentation about backing up your information, and I've already done a number of videos that are on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel about backing up your data. But basically, it's the concept that you want to build your world and you don't want anybody else messing around with it. And so you're going to put up the private property, no trespassing sign, and your green garden cattle gate, and keep everybody out. And that's one aspect, and that's the position that quite a few people take. That isn't the only position, but it is quite a picket. The opposite pole of that is that you can use an online website and basically be part of a greater genealogical community to the extent that you want to become involved, and that to the extent that you are willing to understand the advantages and disadvantages of both having your own set up in your own computer and having and being involved with an online community. That decision you can make, or you can basically live in both worlds. And I can say that I live in both worlds. I certainly have a great deal of data on my own computers that is not yet shared online. And then I have more online that is. I have lots and lots of information that I've shared generally with the genealogical community without any restrictions whatsoever. So what's the importance here? Why would you make this choice? Well, if you're going to have your desktop, this is your desktop computer, this is an iMac that's sitting there. The question is, and these are the main points. First of all, it's predictable. You're going to turn your computer on, and assuming it isn't crashing or you haven't done something really strange, like erase your files, you will have your same exact spot where you were the day before, and you can go on with your work and you can predict it. So it's very predictable about what's going to be there and what's not going to be there. It's private, meaning you can control who gets to look at it. You put it behind a firewall, meaning you can keep other people out of your system, and you can also have passwords that you only know, and you can make it so that it's utterly private. So those are to some people, those are some very, very important functions, and they absolutely can't see past that part of what they're doing. They also have extension features. Regardless of the number of features of the large online genealogy programs, which seem to be overburdened in some cases with features, the desktop programs, in essence, do a lot more, and they are very innovative. And you'll find that their interface, meaning how you work with the information, sometimes is superior to anything right now that you can find online. When you're doing something online, it's the same as if you were doing something with that you're selling to the general public. So anything like that is going to be, in a sense, a little bit generic. But when you have a program you can sell individually to a person, then you have the ability to specialize and get very, very specific in the types of things that you can do with the program. Just as an example, this isn't a genealogy program example, but it's a good understanding example. Most people today have heard of a program called Photoshop. Well, Photoshop is by Adobe software, and it has rumored over 1,000 features. Well, anybody who masters over 100 of those features, even into the 100, a couple of hundred features, are considered to be a Photoshop master. So it's not an issue where you can exhaust, sometimes with some of the desktop programs, if you can exhaust the amount of information that you need to know in order to run the programs. This is kind of another consideration of desktop, is they need upgrades. You buy a program that sits on your computer, and if you do that, then at some point in time, the technology is going to change, and the program itself will begin to have either not take advantage of additional technological advances, or it will become non-functional. Now, we're going to go back and mention this with regards to personal ancestral file. Personal ancestral file they stopped making updates more than, now almost 30 years ago. So personal ancestral file, although it was the most popular and remains an extremely pervasive program for genealogy, has not been upgraded for 20 or 30 years. The technology is finally catching up with that. And it's apparent now that there are features of personal ancestral file that do not work, and also are really detrimental to being involved with the general community. Basically, because of the fact that it doesn't provide for just one example. It doesn't provide a way to have a source and then share the source with the information that you have accumulated. So the sources, when you transport a file out of personal ancestral file and share it with someone else, it will put all your sources into one long sentence, and that makes life very, very difficult for someone who gets the file. And also, desktop programs are something that you may become familiar with. If you started with personal ancestral file many years ago, then working with Ancestral Quest, for example, or Roots Magic would be more familiar to you than perhaps using an online program. So what about online? Well, online programs are available from any device. I feel like this is sort of and you'll see my bias here, which is obviously towards being online, but basically having available to me on my phone, on my laptop, and on my desktop at home, or anybody else's computer for that matter. At the library, when I'm at the BYU Family History Library, I don't have to track in and haul in a suitcase full of documents, because I have it all online. And so I just go in and sign into my Google account and sign into the programs that I need to use while I'm at the library, and then sign out when I leave the library. So basically, I don't have to carry things around anymore. And that to me is an extremely great factor, because I never know where I'm going to be and whether I'll have access. So, and I say it appears to be, that being online appears to be or is collaborative. In other words, your perception may be that it's collaborative, but the way or the program you're using online may not be collaborative. So let me kind of give you an example, and I can talk about it. The family search family tree is definitely collaborative. It means that there is one family tree, and it's unified, and it is totally accessible to all of the people who are users on it. When you create a program, a file in another program, such as MyHeritage or Ancestry, that is your file, and you have control over it. And absent you giving permission directly to someone to look at or make modifications to your program, then you have complete control. So from the aspect of having control, just like you were with the desktop program, you're not giving that up by going online. You may be giving it up by where you choose to have your information online, but you're not giving it up about the control you have over to your program. Instant upgrades, although they may interrupt your workflow from time to time, upgrading programs online is done repeatedly and whenever it's needed. And if you are already a subscriber, or if you have a free subscription like you would with FamilySearch.org and the Family Tree, then you're not paying for any upgrades. So the cost of the annual upgrade cost or the annual subscription cost is not there. There are extensive features. I really, like I've already acknowledged, that desktop programs, in a sense, can have more features than the online programs, and generally do. So that may be an attraction to your decision. They're shareable, which means that I can share the information back and forth without any difficulty at all. Whereas if I have a file on my computer and it's a very large file, I may not be able to share that easily or at all. And to some, being online is different. It's you get used to what's on your own computer, and once you step off onto what's out there in the greater online community, it becomes unfamiliar and, in a sense, threatening to some people. So there's a reason that happens. And so here, when we move on, first of all, I think we need to be very, very clear here. And as they're doing this, I'm speaking from the experience of 39 years as a trial attorney, and having discussed this issue of privacy and looked into the issue of privacy laws and privacy as a policy in general. And the issue is I'm going to use kind of a bad analogy here. It's a dead issue. And the reason it's a dead issue is that dead people don't have any privacy rights. Now, you can come back and say, oh, well, what about, and talk about different things. The only major exception to that is the claim of people whose estates make claims. In other words, if you are a famous person and a persona like Elvis Presley, and then his descendants had a claim on his property rights, and that is, but that's not privacy. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about ownership of someone's person because they were famous. We're talking here about looking at the intimate details of a person's life, which, by the way, once people are dead, they have no right to claim that. And there are so many people out there that think that all of their genealogy, when they put that genealogy on their computer, is private. And the answer is, it's whether you like it or not. I basically can tell you that I can go find all the information that you have on your computer. I don't even have to look at your computer or look at what you've ever done. I can replicate any research that you've done. And I may not want to, and I may never do that, but the fact that you found it in a book, or you found it online, or you found a record or a document in a archive or other repository, doesn't make it your information. It's still everyone's information, and it would be very, very unusual if you have information, for example, that you know is unique, like a Bible, a family Bible, or something of that nature, letters from your ancestors, or different, or diaries or journals or things like that. Yeah, you can keep them and call it private, but it's not private in the sense of protectable privacy. It's private because you deny other people the access to it. That isn't the same as any kind of right to do that. And also important to understand that the online genealogy programs or websites do not show living people without your specific permission or their specific permission. So it's really not the situation where you're going to have a lot of information about living. So when we get to the real bottom line here, and this is the cost line, desktop programs require updates, and many genealogy websites require a subscription. And the question is, would you rather have to update your program every year, or would you like to pay a subscription every year? Well, the answer to this has been made by the software developers, because the software developers say, we'd rather have the income stream every year than having to produce an update on some kind of annual basis and then have only some of our subscribers update their programs. The problem with failing to update your program is the same problem you have when you fail to upgrade your system software. After you've used a computer for a few years, you may find that it no longer functions properly, and that many new features and programs will not run on your computer. And that happens basically on a 5 or 6 or 7 year cycle. So if you have a computer that's more than 5 years old, you're in the danger range of, even if you were to get the upgrades to everything that came along, you would eventually find yourself in the position of having a message come back that your computer does not have enough memory, or it has the wrong processor to have an update. And that is universal. That's not something that Apple made up, or that Microsoft made up, or that anyone else made up. It's simply a factor of the technological change that occurs constantly around us. So important to understand that as technology changes, then you either change with it, or you spin yourself off from the community, online community and computer community. We went through a period of time after personal ancestral file was 30 years ago, when they stopped updating it, that within a very short time, the issue was not so much that we couldn't update the personal ancestral file data, but that it was all stored on floppy disks, on the old storage media. And pretty soon, none of the computers supported a floppy disk. So there were no more floppy disk drives out there. They were specialty items I can remember that it's been about 5 years ago that the BYU library in general announced that they were no longer going to make transfers from floppy disks. They had the old equipment to do that, but they said it wasn't worth their time to do it anymore. And so those technologies all go passing by. I've been going through that recently, with a series of getting information off of what were called zip drives and information off of compact disks and others. I just ran into it last week. I had a compact CD, actually a DVD of photos that was given to me by my brother. And it turned out I couldn't find a computer that would recognize the DVD until I tried my PC at home, and I realized that still would read that old disk, and I was able to get the pictures off the disk. So it's going to be, because of the constant change, it just makes it harder and harder to preserve your information. Now, if you think about your genealogy as you're working on it as building something and putting more and more information in a format that's structured format. So as you build that family tree, or if you build that data store of information or storage of information that you've accumulated over the years, then there's a constant issue of, can you share it, and will you be able to transfer it to something else as time changes? So these are things you need to be thinking about. So if you need an actual date, Personal Ancestral File was discontinued on the 15th of July of 2013. It's now 10 years ago, about. And we have to confront at this point what you're using. If you're using desktop or online, the question is, what happens to your work when you die? Or if you're disabled and unable to continue working on your computer. So the answer is, you've got to answer that question. And I've done a number of classes on this subject over the years, and there's quite a few of them on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. But the question is basically that people who insist on privacy, insist on the fact that no one can have access to my data, because it's my data and I did it and I did all the work, and I want to make sure that no one else messes it up. Okay, that's fine. But you're going to die. And then what's going to happen? First of all, it's very likely, as has happened, not just a story that you hear. This isn't an alligator sort of a traditional story that people tell, but it's very common that we find that people who have done massive amounts of genealogical research, when they die, their children, their heirs, whoever they are, simply do not appreciate anything that's been done. And they are basically saying, we don't want it, and we don't want to have anything to do with it. And we have seen it on the way to the dumpster. I was at some years ago, I was at a computer conference, and one of the participants came in with a large number of boxes and said, this is so-and-so's genealogy. I was over checking on him on his house after he died and found his children hauling all this out to the dumpster. And that was all of his work and his genealogy. So the question we have, of course, in a background that I haven't mentioned in this particular one yet is paper versus electronic. And there's still a lot of people hauling around a ton of paper. And the concept there is that's the first thing that's going to go. Nobody wants to store paper. So you're got to have a way to preserve that information. And so we're back to the issue that I raised near the beginning of this class, and that was it's not either or. You're not saying you don't need to use a desktop program. You don't need to use a desktop program if you use an online program. You can use both. You can do it both ways. And I'll encourage everyone to think that through and think it through in the consequences of what happens if you pass on. And then make it at least digitize and make available all the information that would be lost if you were to pass away. It's a judgment call, and you have to make a determination of this what needs to be preserved. And if you're like me, you have hordes of huge piles of information, and you are constantly working on the process of making it available to more than you and more than my family as I'm able to do that. But there are solutions to that problem. And if you need help and you need specific help, I would suggest contacting someone at the BYU Family History Library and having a talk and discussion about it, or basically going online and doing some research about it, because there's plenty of articles and opinions out there. So here's another problem or issue that I run into, and that is publishing a paper book an alternative. Okay. So what is the story here? Well, first of all, yes, the answer is that's interesting, and many people have done that and have created vast libraries of genealogical, what we call surname books, or descendancy books, or ascendancy books that talk about all the descendants of one person, or one that go back in time to show the descendants of a famous person, or on and on. So there's all different kinds of books out there. And their libraries, the Family History Library in Salt Lake, now the Family Search Library, has a huge number of these books, probably the largest collection there is. And there are digitized online, there's something over 5,000 or so, 50,000 of those books been digitized. So we're talking a lot of books. There are good things and bad things. I have been the recipient in my family of a number of people who have created paper books about my family, and I have boxes of books, of different sets of those books that I can't give away. I have offered them to everybody who has even the vaguest interest, and only a very few people even want the book around. Now, why? Well, because the information in those books is not unique. It's now discoverable and almost entirely online. In my family, for example, because of our relationship back in time, Family Search on the Family Search family tree has all the information about all of the ancestors that will probably show up in any one of the books that I have in my basement. So that's another consideration. But if you have your own personal diary or memoir and you want to give a copy to your children or to your relatives, it's one way of doing that. And but essentially, if you do that, and when my friends around me do that, and publish their individual memoir or diary or journal or whatever, then I encourage them to have it, first of all, donated to a library where I would be assured that sometime in the future that the book would be digitized, or in fact, digitize the book and upload the book onto Family Search or some other website and have it available for everybody to read. So we're now down to the question of sharing photos, letters, documents, records, and certificates. And that's the real issue. The question is either share it, and I would put it this way: lose it. You're going to share it or lose it. So unless you've shared the information with your immediate family, and shared where this all is located and how to access it, where it is, and what it is, the chances are very, very high, almost 100%, that it's all going to get lost. I can go back through time and think of the real tragedies that I've been involved in when it talks about documents. I once went into a person that I knew invited me over and said, my mother just died, and she was an avid genealogist, and we don't have a clue as to what she has here. And I went into a good-sized room in a house, which had from wall to ceiling, practically speaking, shelves, and in the middle was full of more shelves and file cabinets and all sorts of things. And all of that was crammed with maybe tens of thousands of sheets of paper and all sorts of other information. And I went through it and said, you have a veritable gold mine here. Much of this is now obsolete. In other words, it's on Family Search, or it's readily available online. There's no reason to have huge stacks of photocopies of family group records or things like that. But on the other hand, there's probably some absolutely irreplaceable items here that need to be preserved. And they said, well, thank you very much, and we'll call you if we need help. And then I heard later that they had moved all that out into storage someplace and never looked at it. So that's basically what you can count on. There's not going to be the appreciation for what you've done or how much information you have, unless you happen to have rather extraordinarily involved genealogical children or relatives who will jump in and save that information. I see that going on continually with information about my immediate family, and also information about my wife's family. In the last very short period of time, the last couple of weeks, my wife was after some specific information about having a photo of her grandmother's wedding, which she had not had, and put out a question to her relatives and said, does anyone have a photo of grandma's wedding? And the answer came back with a huge number of documents shared with her. She got a pile of very, very helpful, very useful documents, but did not get a picture of the wedding. So that may still be in existence or not. Now, here's one other core issue that I haven't mentioned to this point, and that is, if you stay on your computer and do your work, you're going to end up almost duplicating everything that has been already done. I spend a tremendous amount of time determining whether or not there is additional information that hasn't already been captured about and some of my ancestral lines and the descendants of some of my ancestors. And so we're not talking about duplicating the records. In other words, that's a completely different issue. It has nothing to do with the topic here. The topic here is that you can spend, like I did in the library in Salt Lake City, and getting information. I'm estimating somewhere between 15 and 20 years before I got to the point where I knew what information had already been acquired and how, and whether or not I was just trying to duplicate and do the research to find the same information that was already available. So it wasn't duplication of the people's work. It wasn't duplication of having a duplicate entry in a family tree or a duplicate entry in my genealogy or whatever. It was the fact that I really had to spend years in order to get to the point where I knew enough about what had been done on my family to determine whether or not I was duplicating what had already been researched and done. So it's an issue of duplicating work, much greater issue than it is an issue of simply duplicating a person. I mean, obviously, if you put in a duplicate person, that's a duplicate and that's extra work. But the real issue there, the underlying issue, is that you need to collaborate. You need to have a way to know whether the work has already been done on that particular line. And starting a family tree on one of the larger family genealogy and data programs, the big ones like Ancestry and MyHeritage and Find My Past and others, is that they will tell you that you have matches with other people who have already done work on that line. So you will find out that no matter how unique you think your work is, that all of a sudden you'll find out that there are other people out there by collaborating. And easily the best way to do that is to be involved with the Family Search Family Tree, regardless of your attitude towards it or your questioning about duplication or anything else. Its premise is that everything will be in one place and accessible, and so you should be able to go on there. And from my perspective, if I had the family tree back before, when I started doing genealogy 40 plus years ago, I would not have spent the first 15 to 20 years simply finding out what had been done. I would have had all that information already in front of me on the Family Search Family Tree. And that may not have been complete. I may have still have had a lot of work to do, which is true, and which is what I've done, but it would have saved me a lot of many years. So just kind of the caution, and this is something that has been said many times around the genealogical community, and that is to emphasize that you don't own your own genealogy. That's not owned by anyone. It's a collaborative family thing. If you go back generations, you're talking about tens of thousands of possible relatives. I personally have just on the two DNA testing websites on Ancestry and MyHeritage, I have well over 100,000. Obviously, some duplicates there, but over 100,000 matches. Well, I don't own any of that. I own the 100,000 people are related to me, and they own as much as I do of anybody in that family. So, there's this term that floats around out there called work product. Work product, by the way, is a legal term, and it has to do with work done by an attorney for a client, and it doesn't have anything at all to do with genealogical research. There is no such thing. And the fact that you've spent your life digging this information out of an archive someplace in Germany or someplace does not give you any greater ownership to that information than anybody who copies it the next day. There's just nothing there. If you are wanting to be paid for your genealogical work, I would assume that you would put up yourself as a professional genealogist and start charging for your work. But don't assume that you somehow own the information. So another problem that comes up is copyright. Isn't it true that I can copyright my property, the things I create? And the answer is, it's very simply put, most of the problems with genealogical research is that the time frames put it back before there's any copyright protection. But even if someone does claim the information is copyright protected, as is the case, for example, in Great Britain, that doesn't mean that the information is not available and can't be used or copied. So it's not that, and the documents and genealogy files are not copyright protected as such, and copyright only protects original work, and works there is a legal term, and you can go to copyright.gov. Copyright, copyright.gov, copyright.gov, and get the entire US version of the copyright law right there on that one website. Most of the newer desktop programs have features that help you with your research. I am always amazed at some of the things that can be done with some of the desktop programs. From a work standpoint, it's possible that I am quite a bit older than most, and I have to make judgments based on, do I have enough time left in my life to do this? And so in that context, it's a question of, do I want to have to try to maintain a desktop copy of my information and an online copy? And so that's the decision you're personally going to have to make and put up with. What are you giving up if you don't use one of the large genealogical websites like Family Search? Well, I'm going to get through that pretty quick, because the first thing is record hints. They are going to measurably help you find additional information about your family from their own documents, or in some cases from other documents outside of their program. And so record hints are a fact of life, and using the record hints on the big websites like MyHeritage and Find My Past and Ancestry and Family Search and others is a benefit of having those and using your information and keeping your information on those programs. And data protection. They're going to spend a lot more time protecting their data on FamilySearch.org, for example, than you are going to spend protecting your own personal information. And collaboration. Regardless of how much you own your programs, you're going to find out as you break down those barriers and work with other people that you may very well be able to find a lot more information when you're talking and collaborating with people than if you simply shut out the world and keep your own stuff to yourself. And this goes back to the same thing I said a few minutes ago, and that is, I can access my information from any connected device. So that's a very great advantage to me. And now I'm telling you to think in the long term. Start thinking about not what's going to happen to your data tomorrow, which I think would be a good idea to start anyway, but also think about what happens in 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. What's going to happen to that data? And the answer is, I don't want it piled in my basement and then lost because of some natural disaster or whatever. I would rather make sure that it was online and being protected by Family Search or some of the other websites. And I would just, this is obviously from my perspective, but if you use a desktop program, just make sure you have the same information on Family Search. Just copy it up to Family Search. There are some of the desktop programs that will let you copy the programs directly to Family Search. So I would look at those. And that makes it a lot easier for you to maintain a copy of the information that will be preserved almost without by extraordinary means. Okay, well, thanks for watching. Appreciate those that came.